So if the needs are for love or to diminish a sense of unsafety or to feel, some levels of security, right? We have these needs and they don't just go away. We meet them in all sorts of manipulative and strategic ways until we get to the point where we recognize that it's not working. And that's when the awakening process can begin. That's when your journey can begin. And you start to make these courageous choices to look at how you have responsibility for your suffering. And in that way, you meet dimensions of yourself that you couldn't otherwise have tolerated knowing.
From the Weston A. Price Foundation, welcome to the Wise Traditions podcast for wise traditions in food, farming, and the healing arts. We are your source for scientific knowledge and traditional wisdom to help you achieve optimal health.
Hey, Hilda here. Do you ever feel like you're wearing a mask to get the world's approval? Or maybe even to get your own? Dropping the mask means embracing a side of yourself that you have been avoiding. It's scary, but also freeing. This is all a part of shadow work. This is episode 362, and our guest today is Dr. Kelly Brogan. Kelly is a holistic psychiatrist, the author of A Mind of Your Own and Own Yourself, and the founder of the online healing program, Vital Mind Reset. Today, Kelly invites us to grow in self-awareness and to do some inner work that will enable us to better love others and ourselves. Kelly points out that shadow work is the process of breaking old patterns that we have relied on to get along in society and to rediscover what it feels like to be true to ourselves, to feel feelings, embrace fear, and explore parts of ourselves that we may have not even realized were in existence. She explains how to begin that process today. Steps include embracing curiosity over self-judgment or condemnation, a willingness to learn how to sit with uncomfortable feelings, and the courage to own yourself. She goes over how hard and frightening it is at times to do these things, and she shares personal anecdotes along the way. She also reminds us that so much of the hard stuff we go through is truly an invitation to grow, and that when we accept that invitation, it leads to a life that is much more free and full of vitality than any we may have ever imagined. Before we get into the conversation, I want to let you know that the Weston Price Foundation has a free gift for you. It's a Nutrition for Mental Health brochure. You can explore the relationship between what we eat and mental health and wellness in this brochure. It covers nutrient deficiencies, how modern diets affect our health, and the side effects for drugs for mental illness. Just go to the westonaprice.org website, click on the podcast page. You'll see a drop-down menu box that says About the Show, and there with the list of discounts from our advertisers and sponsors, you'll find the free Nutrition for Mental Health brochure. And Ultimate Dog. Ultimate Dog Chirp Superfood Topper is specially formulated to address stubborn dog allergies by improving the dog's gut health. Chirp is made with human-grade organic ingredients, including organic cricket protein, organic reishi mushrooms, and organic kelp. The U.S.-grown organic reishi mushroom blend in Chirp delivers 120 milligrams of beta-glucans per scoop, and it is scientifically shown to boost immunity while supporting a healthy inflammatory response. Chirp includes soil-based organisms, SBO probiotics, like Saccharomyces boulardii and Bacillus coagulans, which help balance your dog's intestinal flora, reduce inflammation, while enhancing immune function. Chirp includes powerful fungal-based enzymes that improve the dog's overall digestion and support regularity. When combined with the organic kelp, the low-carb organic cricket protein in Chirp provides the dog with vitamins A, B, E, D, K, calcium, potassium, iron, and zinc, all necessary for your dog's good overall health. Organic kelp improves dry, itchy skin while reducing the itching and irritation due to skin allergies. Plus, organic cricket protein is an excellent source of antioxidants, protecting your dog's cells against the free radicals that cause inflammation and cellular damage. Chirp contains 0 fillers and no preservatives, only the ingredients that benefit your dog's health and wellness. I love this about Chirp, and my lab loves the product. Of course she does. She's a lab. But still, check it out and see what it can do for your dog. Visit ultimatedog.com/chirp and use the coupon WISE for 15% off your next order of Ultimate Dog Chirp Superfood Topper for your dog's allergies and overall good health. Your fur baby will thank you. This is Holistic Hilda, and you're listening to Wise Traditions. Welcome to Wise Traditions, Kelly.
Oh, it's such a pleasure to be here.
I've been following you for a while. Of course, you've been on the podcast before, and I've noticed that you often say, own yourself. I think that was even the title of one of your books, The Surprising Path Beyond Depression, Anxiety, and Fatigue to Reclaiming Your Authenticity, Vitality, and Freedom. What do you mean by own yourself?
So that's a great question. I was listening to, I think, a podcast or a workshop recently of sort of like an inspirational businesswoman. And she was like, you've got to come up with your tagline. Like, what are you? And I was like, maybe I'm like the own it queen. Because that's been like so much of what I have devoted not only my public message to, which is what are the vital ingredients to this experience of freedom, this experience of vitality, this experience of joy that we deeply know is our birthright. We know. And that's why experiences that are out of alignment with that expression feel bad. That's why depression, that's why anxiety. And so not only has it been my public message, but it's been my personal work for the past decade is to come into greater experience of personal responsibility for that which is unfolding in my midst. And that sound, I've not pleased everyone with that message because sometimes it can sound like shaming or blaming the victim, right? Like, aren't there just bad things that happen? Well, it's all about your metaphysical narrative. I prefer to live in a world where I actually have God creative power and I am awakening to that. I came here for the delight of experiencing the contrast of my own somnolence, my own sleep, with the awakening to love and the awakening to my own divinity. And as the scariest one is the awakening to my own power. Because before me have said that it's actually like the dimensional hugeness of our personal power that is terrifying. And it's terrifying to us because we were conditioned in our childhoods to associate the expression of that will, that authority, that power, even that, heart energy, even our divinity with unsafety, right? We were conditioned by a hierarchical society that conditioned our parents, that conditioned us. And we're in this beautiful process of recognizing that that's an old set of instructions. And we are the ones now who are in charge of determining what our life experience is going to be. So it's daunting and overwhelming and this process. But once you start it, you can't go back. Like, there's no crawling back up into the womb. It's only recognizing that this is a journey. I call it a spiral path. Like, we revisit over and over and over again these patterns until we are ready to alchemize them. And we alchemize them in our bodies, right? Like, emotions are not something that happens in your head. I think that's what I was trained to believe as a psychiatrist, right?
Right.
They are literal energies that move around your body, and your nervous system has to get to the point of being able to hold those energies, or you won't do the deeper work that is awaiting you until you're ready to do it, right? That's why I'm a big believer in like this Maslow's hierarchy, like order of operations. Like, first, the body temple, right? Like, first, you learn what it is to exercise your power of choice in the realm of lifestyle. And you not only awaken that sense of like, wow, I do have a lot of power in my choices, what I have for breakfast, what kind of water I'm drinking, whether I'm eating this or drinking that, or like going to bed at midnight or 7 p.m. But you also begin to send your nervous system this signal of safety such that the experience of looking where you have not wanted to look emotionally in your life, exploring toxic dynamics, recognizing that your job is unfulfilling, looking at all of the ways that your experience of your family of origin is holding you hostage, whatever, you will be able to courageously move into that work because your literal vessel will be able to hold the energies that come up when you think about somebody not liking you, or when you think about just allowing another person in your world to think that you're wrong or bad right? Like we were conditioned to imagine that these experiences would literally kill us. And the feeling then that comes up in our heart and our chest and our shoulders, like is a cue that says you're about to die. And if we can learn to feel these feelings, we see the alchemy at work because, you can feel rage and then it can move into a kind of sadness that moves into a deep grief that then moves into laughter. And like that can all happen in like 6 minutes if you have the wherewithal to set that container for yourself. So this process becomes quite a journey home to yourself.
Oh, it sounds like it. And you've just shared so many profound thoughts. I guess I want to start with this. A friend of mine recently, her kids were fighting. So she sat down with them and with one in particular who was very mad. And she rubbed their back,
Yeah.
this child's back, and said, "It's okay." And she just said, "I also have big, strong emotions." And she just did all this acceptance. And it sounded so beautiful. She waited patiently, Kelly, for the daughter to process her own emotions. And she's like, "Do you want to hear a story of when I was little and something happened?" At first, her kid didn't say anything, but then later she was like, "Yes." And, to the point where she crawled into her mom's lap out of gratitude. And I thought, wow, so many of us basically still need that permission so that we're no longer disempowered, but we're empowered to kind of own it, as you've said.
Yeah, I have found the most immediately soothing balm to be approval, right? So there's like this kind of like insipid option, which is like acceptance. Like I accept reality as it is. I accept what I'm feeling, or I accept what somebody else is feeling. Okay, that's great. If you can get there instead of fighting with it, right? That's great. Byron Katie often talks about how the root of suffering is insisting that reality should be something different than it is, right? But approval invokes heart energy, right? It's this empathic bridge, sometimes to yourself or to another or to everything that's happening that says, wow, there's wisdom here. This makes sense. Actually, I see why it has to be this way. I would feel the same way if I were you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And to offer approval, right? So let's say I do something in my life. I make a choice that somebody else doesn't like, and they say, how dare you? Like, I can't believe you did this. And then all of a sudden, my shame is triggered, and I think, oh my God, what did I do? I did something so stupid. And immediately, if I can say to myself or just feel, it makes sense that I did what I did, right? It makes sense that I did what I did. And if we can offer that to our children, which is even as they are narrating differently than we would like, they are expressing differently than we would like, if we can offer them that makes sense, it's actually like really meaningful that you feel the way you do, or you're saying the thing you're saying. I want to learn more about your experience. We break the cycle right there. And I'll tell you, like, I've been on this tip for a while. I've been doing inner work and shadow work for years.
Yeah.
And as a part of some reparenting I was doing on my own around relationships recently, I decided to ask my daughters, I have 2 daughters, 2 questions. So I asked them, I said, I want to know about a painful memory that you have of me and something that I did that when you think about it now, it still hurts you. That's number 1. And number 2, I want to know, what do you need from me that you're not getting from me right now in your life? And so here I am, like, I'm a pretty cool cucumber, like I can handle a lot of stuff. And that's part of my trauma response, is that actually, like, I disconnect very easily from my emotions, and then I don't feel much of anything and I can handle it, right? So I've been working on that and working on allowing my emotions to exist and becoming this container for my experience. And it was tested big time with this inquiry. So they responded, they both decided to respond in writing. And the response that my eldest daughter offered, my eldest daughter is like, she's 13 and she's basically like a spiritual guru and teacher for me. So is my younger daughter in a very different way. She teaches me how to feel feelings. And my eldest is just has this, like, her name is Sophia, and it's, she is a goddess of wisdom. Mm. And, she offered to me, she said, listen, I remember that before we moved to Miami, which was 4 years ago, there was a lot of conflict in the family, and this includes my family of origin. And she said, I remember, well, whatever, I don't need to get into the details, but she had very unsavory memories of my role, Kelly. And oh my God. I mean, like, my story about what happened was like, I was the victim. Okay. And here she has a story where, like, I am the villain. And I was like, not only like lit on fire by this, but I was, again, so I read this not in her presence, and I was hysterically crying. Okay. My children do not typically like trigger me. Like they're not where a lot of my, like, and so this caught me really off guard. And I recognized like, wow, I was actually secretly attached to my children. It's called a narcissistic extension. Like my children experiencing all of my psychospiritual work that I've done as 100% positive. Like, and if my children see me as something other than I would like to see myself, I can't handle it. And I failed. That's what I felt. I felt like, wow, I have failed in my one mission in this life, which is to like end these cycles of abuse and trauma in my family line. And I then in my despair, I recognized like this little voice was like, no, Kelly, this is the moment, actually. Like, this is the moment where you end the cycle. And so when I sat down with her, I recognized my story is irrelevant. And I did not say one word about my version of the story, my thing, whatever. And I simply crossed the bridge to explore her experience. That day evolved our relationship like a quantum leap. And not that it was like problematic to begin with, but like I noticed within days, she was like more affectionate with me. I mean, it was just so, and I felt so proud of myself that I could do that. And I had to hold myself, right? Like my inner girl was like terrified that I have been called bad and wrong, right? She thought she was having a crazy freak out inside me saying like, we're about to die, like mobilize the defenses, right? And I have gotten to a point where finally, like I could just barely hold the container and say like, no, I'm here now. I'm an adult woman. It's okay. I can handle this, right? We can handle this. I'm driving the car. I hear you. I see you, little girl inside. And it's okay if somebody thinks these things. And isn't that, everything?
Yes. And what if what we think feels like dying is actually the birth of something better?
It almost always is. And that's exactly the hallmark, like the signature that I've found is when you're about to expand, this is my biased perspective, you will choose to lose something, relinquish something, or walk away from something that you formerly thought you would die without. That has been the hallmark of every like vaginal canal I have passed through in my multiple rebirth, in this lifetime. It's when I've had a dependency, I've had an attachment, I've had an experience of hidden victimhood and hidden disempowerment that was cloaked in well, everything's fine. And if I just keep this going, it'll be okay. And often there's a dynamic in there of like what I refer to as like getting, trying to buy eggs from the hardware store where it's like, just keep trying. Eventually it'll work. Like eventually you'll get the feeling of love or connection or empowerment or whatever that you're looking for from this place that just cannot offer it to you. And it's the same thing I observed with all of my patients before they would come to me is they had that experience of awakening to the reality that they were trying to buy eggs from the allopathic medical hardware store, the eggs being their own experience of meaningful embodiment, right? Like meaningful selfhood, right? Because they knew that something was being delivered through these symptoms that they were having. And what they ultimately concluded after working with the conventional system was, oh, it must be the affirmation of my wrongness. Like, oh yeah, I am actually this, messed up. I am actually this broken. And they only found their way to me because there was like another part in there that said, hold on a minute, like there's more to the story. And that story can't be completed at this place we've been going to. We've got to go elsewhere now that we know what we want, which is transmutation, transformation, and alchemy. It's the light that shines through the wound. It's not the festering septic systemic infection or whatever that comes from the wound.
So Kelly, you've been in this field for a while, so you're using terms that may be new to some of us. And I honestly am not even sure I get this concept. So I want to ask you, what do you mean by shadow work? What do you mean by inner work?
Here's the easiest way to explain it. So we were raised, all of us, in a society, no matter where you were raised in the world. Well, maybe there are some indigenous exceptions, but where there is a binary consciousness, a dual consciousness, where there is such a thing as good and bad, right? And good is good and bad is bad. And because of that, you learned through social conditioning and often very elaborate systems of enduring reinforcement, like intermittent conditioning, where sometimes your mom had a freak out if you left a crumb on your dish. Sometimes she didn't, right? Sometimes she pet your head because she didn't even notice. So this like somewhat crazy making, but ultimately learnable system of reward and punishment was in place in most of our households. And even if you were not like physically beaten or punished in seemingly measurable ways, there was maybe a withdrawal of love, right? Like, so maybe my daughter comes in when she's 2 years old and she's so excited because she just found this caterpillar outside and she's got it on her finger and she says, "Mama, mama, mama." And I'm on this super important phone call. Maybe I'm being interviewed. This actually happened. I remember one time, like a podcast or whatever. And I'm like, "Sophia, stop," or whatever, right? Like, that's all it takes for her to learn and imprint my expansion, my happiness, my radiance is a problem for my mom. Okay, well, she is a helpless, dependent individual. And the loss of love, even if it's that subtle like withdrawal of love, is actually like existentially problematic for the human mammal, right? Because we spend our fourth trimester outside of the womb. We are totally dependent, right? Children are not able to make the choice that we can make in a bad marriage where we actually get up and leave, right? So what happens is you end up strategically curating the aspects of your persona, this mask, to present to the world so that you can secure love, approval, and connection. And there gets to a point that, Jung refers to as the individuation process, where you recognize that it's kind of not working. Like, you did all the things, right? You got the job, the relationship, like the body, or maybe you're still struggling to do the things or whatever, all of the ways that you've been going to the hardware store to buy eggs all these years. You're like, oh my God, I still don't feel okay. Like, just okay, let alone joyous, let alone like living every day in bliss and pleasure and ecstasy. Okay. Just, I'm not okay. And what do? We develop all sorts of addictions, right? All sorts of workarounds. Addiction is not a pathology. It is a very necessary way to meet needs that you don't have another way to meet, right? And pharmaceuticals are nothing other than that. So if the needs are, for love or to diminish a sense of unsafety or to feel some levels of security, right? We have these needs and they don't just go away. We meet them in all sorts of manipulative and strategic ways until we get to the point where we recognize that it's not working. And that's when the awakening process can begin. That's when your journey can begin. And you start to make these courageous choices to look at how you have responsibility for your suffering. And in that way, you meet dimensions of yourself that you couldn't otherwise have tolerated knowing. And we all have this, right? So if I think of myself as a nice person, in my shadow is my selfish, mean, manipulative person. Always. Every person has this dynamic, right? I might think of myself as a selfish, mean, manipulative person. And then in my shadow is my docile, sweet, compassionate, kind angel, right? So like whatever it is my self-concept encompasses, in my shadow is the opposite. So like very often in my, like work, career woman life or whatever up in New York, I would get very triggered by women that I felt were disorganized and incompetent for whatever reason. Like that was like annoying to me as qualities in women. I had to meet as a part of this integration process, the part of me that is disorganized and incompetent, right? And that is terrified that if she ever is exposed, she has like all of these protector parts hiding her, because if she's ever exposed, the jig is up or whatever, like I will lose love. And so that's where the portal to your own self-integration is always going to be through your judgment and resentment. Yeah.
Oh, so interesting. Maybe this is why I've heard people say, everyone around you is a mirror.
Yeah.
So if I'm super, as you say, triggered or just annoyed by someone, I'm like, oh my gosh, this person, I need to take that emotion, observe it, right?
Yeah.
Not judge myself, but realize it may be that something in that person is very much in me. And God is using that person to shed light on something that I have within me. And I might need to learn to accept.
Exactly. I would go so far as to say 100% of the time, if you are upset about something, there is a projected and disavowed part that you are being introduced to in that moment. It's not like I pass by this serial killer. This is not a good analogy. On the street corner or whatever, and he is me. Like it's actually through emotions that, so there are all of these different parts of us inside, right, that have been split off because of this strategic approach to life. And so if there is upset, resentment, disappointment, blame, judgment, condemnation, that is the activation of a part that is holding an old story that so wants to be alchemized, felt, and allowed to play, different parts and expand the definition. It's called like identity plasticity, like expand the definition of who we are. And then life becomes lighter. It's kind of like, it becomes like a magic carpet ride, but it requires the capacity to be seen as bad and wrong, right? So I have people in my life who imagine that if like the public were to know about like transgression, or the public were to perceive something negative about them, like it would like be so bad, right? I'm at the point where like I do stupid mistakes all the time. Like I make tons of mistakes. Like it does not threaten me or bother me any longer that anyone would think badly of me, because I don't take it personally.
Yeah, because actually they will think badly of you. So it's like, okay.
Yes. And it's not about me. I mean, it's not enjoyable necessarily, but it also helps me see like, okay, like there's not maybe a great connection here. Okay, moving on, like their upset is their invitation. And if I'm upset about their upset, oh, well, there's my invitation, right? Like, so it's this radical responsibility model for emotions, I think, is really the only way, because otherwise, even on the sort of geopolitical scale, we can be manipulated and leveraged based on the projection of our own shame, the projection of our own judgment onto others, right? And then we get divided. And then what happens? We get conquered, right? So like in recent dimensions of the PSYOP, there's been a leveraging of this idea of like the good citizen, right? What does the good citizen do? And it's actually been, I think, in many ways leveraged in spiritual communities, right? Because most people go follow spiritual gurus and look to spirituality because they want to feel better and they want to experience themselves as good because they got a lot of beliefs that they are bad,
Right.
and twisted by their darkness. And so they engage in something called spiritual bypass, which is the avoidance of anything that feels bad, flight into the light and transcendence. And so they are sitting ducks for this kind of a psyop that says, if you are a good, virtuous, compassionate, caring individual, you will wear your mask and get your prophylactic injection, right? Like that is what you will do. And if you not do that, you are selfish. And of course, this concept of selfish is part of this mechanism, because I believe in something called sacred selfishness, penned by this guy, Bill Harris. And I love that concept because without a deep focus on self-awareness, you will never know what it is to care for another person, let alone love them. It's not actually possible, because you will be engaged in this endless projection of your parts that you are unconscious about. And you'll either idealize those people and attach to them, or you will vilify them. And you will be engaging this war on the outside that I like to joke, like, you're funding both sides of the war. And it's inside. It is inside. Any conflict that I have in my real life, and this includes with government and all sorts of secret agents or whatever, like universe I used to really live in around activism, it is inviting me to reconcile those parts within and to really make informed choices about what I want to do with my energy.
Right.
Because that's what we're to get to like occultist about it. But the harvesting of fear, I think, is a very real thing. Emotions are incredible, precious resource, right? That can be tapped. And so the experience of fear within us is something we are not taught to hold or to alchemize. And it's very real. It's very real. And it's very active. And when we can get to this place where we experience fear, we dialogue with it, we get to know it. What is it trying to tell me? What's actually happening within me? What am I afraid of? Right? Then we can recognize that often what we're afraid of is like our aliveness. Like we don't actually know how to feel so alive. And if you've ever had an expanded experience, right? Like even just like a good thing that happened to you, like an exciting, cool thing that happened. I bet that feeling didn't last very long, right? Because what happens is we start to habitually contract again. We look for conflict. We start a fight with our boyfriend. We start to focus on the bills or whatever, because that experience of expansion is something we have to, as somatic experiencing practitioners say, we have to titrate into. We have to take little steps into holding our power, holding our aliveness, because it's otherwise represented something that was dangerous in our childhoods.
It's so fascinating what you're describing, because I feel like it's been something of what we've gone through these past few years. We could decide, or at least see, am I going to live in fear?
Yeah.
Or am I going to embrace the unknown of my own power and personal responsibility?
Yes. And I mean, as an activist, I have had some very humbling moments where I have recognized that, first of all, a lot of people are drawn to activism because they have very significant unexplored trauma. And they are playing the rescuer role in the drama triangle, which is the Cartman drama triangle, which is the victim triangle, right? Where there's a villain, there's a victim, and there's a rescuer, but they're all in victim consciousness, which is feeling disempowered and empowering the enemy. Right? Yeah. It's so funny, right? Because in victim consciousness, you actually have this very intimate relationship with your enemy where you're just like, their energy is like always up in your body. And when you are the rescuer or the activist or the healer or the helper, sometimes, not always, but sometimes there is this dynamic where you're actually implying that the person, maybe it's the anonymous victim, like that person who you imagine is going to not get a vaccine because of reading your blog or whatever. You are actually reifying this concept that they can't figure it out for themselves, empower themselves, or do it without you. That's not true. We all have this native power, and nobody actually needs rescuing. Nobody. That doesn't mean we don't need and deserve and require support. Okay, that is a totally different thing. But this concept of rescuing is actually a hierarchical power dynamic. And it also doesn't mean that we don't each have our gifts. However, when you're the rescuer, what can happen is that you just end up moving your way around that triangle. And that's why when Nietzsche said that be careful in fighting the monster that you don't become him, I've seen this to be very, very true and brushed with it myself, where I got to a place in my own activism where I actually recognized that without this level of conflict and fight against the bad daddy and bad mommy, I wasn't sure I would have meaning, right? I wasn't sure I wanted things to get better if I was really honest with myself. Like in this more beautiful world, like what is my role? Because I'm this valiant warrioress. And if I'm not doing that because there's no fight, well, then who am I? And what if I don't matter because I can't help anyone? And what if that means I'm not lovable?
Coming up, Kelly explains why whatever you're feeling right now is perfect. It's all okay. Whether you're disempowered, depressed, anxious, tired, it's totally okay.
You're listening to the Wise Traditions podcast from the Weston A. Price Foundation. We pause now to recognize our sponsors.
Paleo Valley. You guys, the New York Department of Health and Mental Hygiene found that 84% of products that say 0 grams of trans fat on the packaging actually contain trans fat. How is this possible? Because if a product contains less than 0.5 grams of trans fat per serving, they don't have to put it on the label. But a lot of meat snack products are made with hydrogenated oils, which contain trans fats and are particularly bad for heart health, blood sugar levels, inflammation, and belly fat. Paleo Valley beef sticks, on the other hand, are free of hydrogenated oils, making it one of the healthiest meat snacks on the market. Plus, Paleo Valley beef sticks use old world methods of fermentation, which gives the beef sticks a long shelf life without the use of harmful acids and chemicals. Our family, well, we're just huge fans of these sticks. Honestly, I order them all the time. We especially love the jalapeno and teriyaki flavors, which reminds me I have to get on the site and order them right now. You can get yours too at paleovalley.com and use the code WISE for 15% off. Again, that's paleovalley.com and the code word WISE. And enjoy. Optimal carnivore. Organ meats are some of the most nutrient-dense foods on the planet, but they can be intimidating to prepare and hard to source. Optimal carnivore makes it easy to get started. They take 100% grass-fed organ meats from New Zealand, freeze-dry the organs, and encapsulate them into convenient bovine gelatin capsules. They chose New Zealand because it is one of the cleanest environments on Earth. The animals are 100% grass-fed and grass-finished and free of hormones, pesticides, antibiotics, and GMOs. And since our ancestors would have eaten the whole animal, Optimal Carnivore created a unique blend of 9 different organs in their grass-fed organ complex. It's a powerful combination including beef liver, brain, thymus, heart, kidney, spleen, pancreas, lung, and gallbladder. This is awesome. Each organ brings something unique to the table, providing a large range of nutrients. It's a real nose-to-tail solution, and it's perfect for people on the go or those trying to develop an appreciation for organ meats. I take these supplements myself to help fill in the gaps. Plus, Optimal Carnivore plants 1 tree for every product sold, which helps the environment. Again, they offer a grass-fed organ complex, a grass-fed bone marrow, and a grass-fed liver product. Go to Amazon.com/optimalcarnivore and use the code WESTON10 to save 10% on all products. That's Amazon.com/optimalcarnivore and the code WESTON10. This is Holistic Hilda, and you're listening to Wise Traditions. I feel like some people listening might feel so disempowered right now, Kelly. They might feel all the things we talked about earlier, depressed, anxious, tired.
Yeah.
And I guess turning to a rescuer might feel easier, but we want to invite them to maybe explore the shadow side, like you've been saying, because then they will find their own strength and resilience come to the fore.
Yes. So the thing is, whatever you're feeling is perfect. Like, that's the thing. It's like all already okay. That's like the big reveal that I've had in my own life. Like, there's nowhere to get to. There's nothing to heal. Like, there's nothing that has to change. Like, it's actually already here and now, totally okay. Totally okay. And why is because of this fundamental premise, which is that it's happening this way because you actually want it to be this way. And when I say this way, I mean how you're narrating it. So one of your superpowers as a human is your power of narration, right? You get to tell the story of what's happening. So I could feel very victimized in a given dynamic, right? Relationship where I say, he did this and he did that, and I can't believe it and whatever. Like, or not to bypass, right? There's a lot of feelings that come up with that victim story. Those are super important. Let them ride the train of your poor me story so that you can feel those feelings, approve of them, explore them, let them move in your body, literally move your body around, to see what these feelings do, right? Because without much like word added to them, they're just sensations. It's a racing heart. It's a tight stomach. For me, it's like when I feel afraid, those like leaf rakes, those like big green, like pronged, like leaf rakes. Oh, yeah. It's almost like one of those like rakes is like in my chest. And then the bottom stick of the rake is like plunging down in my stomach. Like, that's like literally what it feels like to be in my body when I feel like upset about what somebody has said or done or whatever. Okay. And then I watch that rake and I'm like, within like a minute, I kind of can't find it anymore. And then maybe an hour later, it'll come back or whatever. So it's very kinetic is the point. But when you ride that victim story to allow the liberation of your feelings, you also can play with it a little, right? You can say, I wonder what's in this for me, right? And I wonder if this is actually going to bring me to an experience of awareness and choice that couldn't have been available otherwise. Like, oh, this is why I wanted it to happen this way. I wouldn't have designed it maybe this way if I was like totally in charge, but I can see why it actually needed to happen just this way for me to awaken to this other dimension of me that I would have never met, right? Because it's our cardinal fears. Like, I'll tell you, I have been living, which is a big part of my activism, with a cardinal fear that men can kill me. Okay, like Jordan Peterson says, women are afraid that men will kill them, and men are afraid that women will laugh at them. I find that to be very wise and very deep, right? And
so wise. I'd never heard that before.
And it's just one perspective. However, as somebody who has developed quite an arsenal of defenses, intellectually and otherwise, attitudinally, what are these defenses actually saving me from? Like humiliation? I don't know, maybe. But no, I think it's bigger. This is existential. And maybe even I'm carrying that fear for a lot of collective women, right? In my work or whatever, my chosen role. And so if I don't experience that fear through these various things that come up in my life, these very personal experiences that come up in my life, and I go into it and I talk to that fear and I meet that part of me and I meet all the parts of me that are protecting that fear, right? And I thank them for doing their part, right? And I liberate that fear to play. That's what's happened. That's why I have started to desecret my sexuality. And that's why I've started to liberate so many aspects of my relationship to money and my relationship to choice in my life and my mothering. It's because I went into that fear and I recognized that it's not appropriate any longer for who I am and what I am today, that it's a fear from old, right? Like from many, many decades ago. And that doesn't mean it's totally extinguished. And if I were to like walk down an alley, in the Bronx or something, that I wouldn't be on guard. It's not about that. This is a storyline of my life. And I get to rewrite that storyline anytime I am courageous enough to actually sit down with its component parts and learn about them, right? So the point is, if you are feeling something, it is an invitation. You do not have to take the invitation. You will take it when you're ready. And you're ready when you're ready. Listen, like I have made a lot of courageous choices in my life and I was not ready the second before I was ready. And the moment you're ready, it'll just feel like jumping in a cold pool, like, here I go.
Yes.
And you'll get through that shame wall, you'll get through that fear wall. And on the other side, you'll realize, oh my God, I'm still alive. And you're a new you. In that moment, you are a new you. And you will never go back to the person you were, who believed the things you were, who was holding yourself small in this little cage of your own design. I mean, that's the big reveal. It's like we are our own captors. There's no one holding us in this cage but ourselves.
I have two thoughts right now. One is I know someone whose wife basically told him to get out. And he said he felt like he was in a canoe and tossed out of the canoe into the water and then went over a waterfall. He thought he was going to die, but he found himself bobbing up.
Yes.
And this illustration reminds me of what you're saying and what you've said on posts and stuff, that the best way out is through. It's awareness. It's taking the invitation to explore parts of ourselves that may be frightening at first, but that will help us realize our potential.
I think frightening is often an understatement, right? Because when that happened to him, it wasn't like, oh, this sucks, right? It probably brought up in him the terror of a child who thinks they're about to die. That's literally the signature of when you are about to do major league alchemy. Okay. And all you have to do is be willing. It's like childbirth, right? To birth a child, you don't have to do much of anything. You have to be willing to capacitate the energy and sensations moving through your body. That's kind of like weirdly kind of it, right? So you have to be willing to hold the emotions in your body. Of course, I'm a believer in my own program, Vital Mind Reset, which sets up your body to hold these emotions, since I don't think that's a trivial dimension of it. However, you have to be willing and able, let's say, to hold these emotions in your body. And then you get to offer yourself that meaning, that approval. You get to say, there's something in this for me. If I simply agree not to fight with reality, if I simply agree not to say, no, this can't exist. It already exists. It's already happening, right? So like the more you can get to a place of like, I mean, this is even true on the international scale or whatever, like this is happening. Well, however I'm seeing it, as it's happening, however I'm narrating it, this is happening. What's in here for me? What am I really upset about? Can I go into that feeling and learn something? I mean, I'm a big fan of parts work, which is, there are many ways to do it, but it's essentially, you can do it with practitioners through something called internal family systems, but it's essentially a way of dialoguing with the different aspects of yourself, right? Because there's going to be a part that is blaming his wife, right? How dare she? This is crazy. We need to get the best lawyer and we need to do this. And then there's another part that's like, calm down, be a man. Like, it's fine. You're going to be fine. And there are parts that are reacting to those parts. And then deep down inside is that fragment of the child that is holding the fear, right? That's holding that intense emotion of rejection, abandonment, betrayal. And the adult's role, the conscious adult, can interact with that child, validate that emotion, and reclaim that part. And that's when the expansion happens, so that you understand yourself to be so much bigger, more free, more dimensional, lighter than you would have ever been had you not been introduced to that part through the challenge in your life. We're just not enculturated, to appreciate that challenge yields growth and empowerment. It's not just like, oh, I'm going to get through this. It's like, oh my God, I get to meet myself on the other end of this, whatever that is.
My concern, Kelly, is for those who can't see the invitation and feel like the only way out is to take their own life. I feel like I've seen that darkness in different friends' experiences, and it becomes so painful that I think they think that's the best way out.
Yeah.
How can they move through that feeling?
With this framework, this framework is probably the best preventive psychiatric medicine, one can offer themselves, because I worked in a practice for 10 years where probably 30% of my practice at any given time was actively suicidal, that I consider to be one of the psychospiritual and even biological sequelae of being on psych meds for more than like 2 or 3 months, that the process of coming off of them can be that harrowing physiologically. And of course, when part of the reason you took meds was to not feel what you were feeling, then those feelings don't go away. They're still in us decades later. And people like researchers like Candace Pert actually believed that they were stored, and you could argue proved that they were stored in our tissues, literally. So they come back, and then we have no tools and no context for integrating it. And it's like literally feels like it's going to kill us. So we want out. That nihilistic impulse of pressing the reset button makes a lot of sense in certain contexts where we don't have a greater understanding for the nature of emotions, why they exist, what they're here to show us, and how it is the case that there is always a gift, literally always a gift on the other side of so-called negative emotions. Always. So that's another reason why I like Part's work, is because, and specifically IFS, is because there's not many modalities that can hold suicidality. And I've watched through the work of Tom Holmes and Dick Schwartz, I've watched these practitioners who I don't entirely share all of their other beliefs, but I have watched their ability to enter into pretty severe symptomatology like suicidality and explore it, right? In psychiatry, I was never taught. It was just a bad thing, a dangerous thing happening. And, people were either voluntarily medicated or involuntarily medicated, believe it or not. And that was that, because death is bad and wrong. Symptoms are a problem. There's no meaning in it, right? Like when you explore what's in there, there's something very sensical at the root of that feeling, right? Like these emotions are so huge and they're tagged with mortal danger. So of course, the experience is like, all right, I'm out. I can't do this. I don't know how to do this. This feeling is going to kill me anyway. And so I'm going to start over, right? And so to explore the terrain with the understanding that the body, mind, and spirit make no mistakes. There's no such thing as a mistake in my world, right? 100% of things are a direct reflection of what is already existent inside. So our experiences show us that. We can look if we want, or we don't have to look, and that's everyone's prerogative. However, I do think if there is a culture that we can grow that says emotions are meaningful, you can learn how to feel them. And it starts with healing your nervous system and your body. And then it goes into dimensions of practices that can support the real-time experiences of emotion, which honestly do not need to be that complicated. Like the next time you feel something in your body that feels uncomfortable, like emotionally, you drop everything, you go into a bathroom, you find a quiet room for 2 to 3 minutes. You sit down, you put your hand on your heart, you put your hand on your belly, you put your hands over your face, and you literally just explore the sensation. Like you're an anthropologist, like, okay, it's sharp and it feels kind of like fiery. Maybe it's like a red ball in my chest. Okay, now it's moving down. It's almost like electrical shocks. Okay, now it's in my stomach. Oh, that's interesting. Right? Like you literally just do that. It doesn't need to be some fancy thing. And then once you do, it moves. And then you have a little psychological freedom, right? Where you can start to inquire. I think curiosity is the most powerful tool that we have, right? Because it is the antidote to fear. Either you're going to freak out or you're going to ask why, right? And so you can start to say, like, what's here, right? Like, what part of me is bringing forth some learned old material that I have the opportunity as a conscious adult now to organize and to reallocate. When I've done parts work, and I'll have actually soon an interview, a very vulnerable interview that I did with Tom Holmes that I recorded of him doing parts work on me. Every time I meet a part that is holding a burden of an old story, once that part is liberated, like all she wants to do is like dance and play with her kittens and like run around outside, right? So then I have that energy reclaimed for myself. But this alchemy is not a part of our collective consciousness. Well, it is to some extent growing yet, where there is this idea that emotions have an arc, right? Because even when we cried as kids, what were we told? Stop crying. You're fine. It's fine. So we never learned like, oh, if I cry, eventually I'll stop on my own. And it will be because a new energy will come into my body, right? We never learned that. And so that's why, many of us walk the earth having this feeling like sometimes if we start crying, we feel like I'm never going to stop. I'm never going to stop. If I don't want to cry because like the dam will break, right? And that is it's an old program that came from childhood where we never learned that emotions have an arc. But we can learn that as adults. It just takes one experience. Once you have one experience of feeling an emotion that you need to fix, right? You need to write that email. You need to break something. You need to like take that med, have that drink. You need to fix it, right? Once you have one experience of just holding it and seeing that it will move if you do nothing, then you can't unknow that. And then you are empowered in a way that unfortunately the vast majority of human beings walking the earth are not at this moment, where they imagine that there is a way to avoid feeling the bad feelings, projecting them, fighting with them on the outside, maintaining this shame wall of their badness and wrongness that they never want to actually encounter or experience. And so they never learn to own themselves, right? Like coming full circle. And I think in many ways, what we came here to recognize is that in self-ownership, in self-knowledge, and in self-discovery, we reconnect to the divine. We reconnect to that channel, to infinite consciousness, to our creatrix empowerment. And it is nothing but bliss. That's all that's available through that channel. It's like this, like awe that we get to have this experience. We chose this experience. And as Alan Watts said in one of his lectures, we want it this way. He said, like, if you could dream any dream you want, when you go to bed at night, like, yeah, the first night you're going to have like amazing sex and you're going to have all the money and like have the beautiful body and whatever. He's like, but by the seventh night, you're going to be like, I liked it the way it was. Where I don't actually know, but like I kind of designed it, but I'm pretending that I'm not the one who designed it, right? Like this is the play. We're playing hide and seek with our own divine consciousness. And we came here for this experience. And trust me, like this is not easy to remember when, you're in the throes of conflict and fear and like all the horrible things about life in the world. It's a practice of remembering that, of choosing to engage that and to balance out all of the body signals of danger, harm, and unsafety with this meta awareness that love is present even when we can't see or feel it.
What you're describing is something I feel like I've witnessed among like tribal elders, among indigenous people, among older people who have gone through so much. They understand that timeless phrase, this too shall pass. They understand that we can sit with grief, that we can sit with terror, that we can make it through so much because they've lived it and they know it. And it takes a lot of us time to get there. But it sounds like there's beautiful vitality along the way and in the end.
Yes, I would agree with that. And that's the word I love. That's why it's in all of my products, just that vitality. It's our birthright. It is. And we know that. And that's why we have these signals of suffering whenever we're out of alignment with our power to generate that vitality and the conditions associated with it. Yeah.
Yeah. So we have to wrap up, but this has been amazing. I feel like people are probably going to want to go back and listen again. I know I do, just to, as I learn to navigate the shadow self, to do this inner work that is, it's rewarding work, but it is work, right?
It is. And it can feel like, oh my God, I did not sign up for this job, but you did. You did. And you love it secretly, even though it's not always apparent. And I have to imagine that the work-play balance, that feeling of like, oh my God, this grind, it starts to recalibrate over time, where the hidden dimensions of you become fewer and fewer and fewer. And then you start to play with life because you realize like, wow, this is like a fun game. Even the experiences that I say I don't like. I know that's a stretch, but I think that's where we get to. I mean, I'm getting there. Trust me, I'm not there, but I do think I can see incrementally that even as I am struggling, I can say like, okay, there's some part of me that sees why I would have created this. And maybe even there's some part of me that kind of weirdly likes this, like the way we like roller coasters in horror movies, you know?
Yeah.
We're wired for some funny sensations for sure.
Wow. So Kelly, I want to ask you the question I often pose at the end. I usually just say, if the listener could do one thing to improve their health, what would you recommend? That could still be the question, or it could be, if the listener wanted to get started on shadow work, what would the first step be?
On shadow work, I was at this silent retreat right before the pandemic in March of 2020. And the teacher asked this question that has stuck with me ever since. And I ask myself this question all the time as like a self-accountability, self-exploration prompt, which is that if there is one thing that you really, really wish you could unknow about yourself, about your life, about your choices, about your lifestyle, what is that thing? Right? So somewhere in your intuitive realm is already an awareness of how you are self-betraying and then experiencing that as just random conditions of disempowerment in your life. And the self-betrayal is that you actually know that something is not working, or you actually know that you have to leave a job or a relationship, or you actually know that you got to stop drinking, or you actually know that you really want to be living in a nicer house, right? Or you actually know that you're charging your clients $100, but like, really, like, why aren't you charging them $500 or whatever it is?
Yeah.
And you kind of like are ashamed of it, and it's uncomfortable, and you don't even want to look at it. You kind of wincingly acknowledge that you have this intuitive awareness inside. That can be the beginning of aligning with your power, even though it feels like a shame portal that you do not want to walk through. Because if we recognize that ultimately experiences of betrayal on the outside are reflecting our betrayal of our own inner intuition, our own inner knowing, that is the beginning of connecting to choice and the power of our choice, right? Like the choice can be so simple, like, I really know I shouldn't be sending my child to school in a mask, and I'm fighting the district and blah, blah, blah. Well, the truth is that you can homeschool, right? And you may be telling yourself, no, I can't, I have to work and I have to this, but you have that choice, and you're not making it because you're in this loop where you're imagining that you don't have a choice. And that's always an illusion. We always have creative choice. I choose to live in that world where I believe that. And it's okay if we don't make the empowered choice, because at one point we'll be ready and we will.
Wow. Oh my gosh, so much to think about. Kelly, thank you for your time. Thank you for your wisdom. And I will see you at the conference this October.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for this conversation.
Our guest today was Kelly Brogan. You can find out more about her resources and programs at kellybroganmd.com. And I'm Hilda Labrador, the host and producer of this podcast for the Weston A. Price Foundation. You can find me at holistichilda.com. And for the transcript for this podcast, visit our website, westonaprice.org, and click on the podcast page. And now for a recent review from Apple Podcasts. And this is not a good one, you guys. It's from LM 18273645, and they gave us just 1 star, and they said not well researched. And then their comment was not well informed. This is kind of disappointing. Honestly, we do our best to do the research on every episode we do. We make sure the experts are vetted, that they know what they're talking about, that they're reliable, and that you can count on the information they're giving you to be top notch. So let's respond to this review on Apple Podcasts with some reviews of our own, shall we? Please rate and review us if you haven't yet. I hope this puts a little fire in your belly to get you rating and reviewing our show on Apple Podcasts. Just go there, give us as many stars as you like, and tell us what you think of the show. And honestly, if you think it's not well researched, you don't have to listen at all. But for those of you who are still with me, thank you for listening. Stay well, my friend. Hasta pronto.
On behalf of the Weston A. Price Foundation, thanks for listening. We have many free resources to support you on your health journey. Visit westonaprice.org to find podcasts, articles, videos, and more. You can also find a local chapter near you for help in finding sources of great food. We invite you to support the Foundation's mission of education, research, and activism by becoming a member. Thanks again, and take care. Wise Traditions is a project of the Weston A. Price Foundation for wise traditions in food, farming, and the healing arts. The content on this podcast is provided for informational purposes only and is not intended to substitute for the advice provided by your doctor or other healthcare professional. It is not intended to be, nor does it constitute healthcare or medical advice.